Welcome back to Indie Comics Corner. I'm Chris, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about the books that I read in October of 2024. But as usual, before we start, be sure to like the video if you like this video and subscribe so you don't miss more in the future. Okay, to kick things off, I'm going to talk about At the Mountains of Madness. This is the Gotanabe adaptation, manga adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's story of the same name, published by Dark Horse in this nice deluxe edition. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I've already covered this in the top 5 horror recommendations video that I did, so I'll link that down below if you want to hear more of my thoughts. But overall, I really like this book. We follow an expedition group exploring Antarctica. Some of them start to get a bit too obsessed over certain findings, and that leads to a bunch of madness and eventual horror and creatures, ancient things that exist within that space. It's a really great adaptation. The artwork is stunning. The double page spreads that Gotanabe does are just spectacular, and the overall production of this book is really nice. The silver lining, I don't know how well it comes across, but silver line pages, just a nice little touch that makes the whole book feel really cold in a good way. The only issue with the silver lining is that it did stick a couple of the pages together just slightly in parts. It was easy to just open that up, but just something to consider if you are going to buy this book. One of the nice things about doing this channel is it's kind of making me go back through and read some of my collection or put stuff to the top of my to be read list, like At the Mountains of Madness. When I did the James Tynion video, I decided, well, I'll go back through and read some of his books again, like I did with Some Things Kill the Children last month. And this month, I started again Wynd. So I've only read the first volume of this again. I'm going to keep going through these because they're just so delightful. This is every bit as fun and whimsical as it was the first time I read it. Again, I'm not going to cover this in too much detail today because I have covered this already a bit in the James Tynion video, which I'll link as well. But it follows this young boy, Wynd, who is a magical being, ever so slightly. The problem with that is the world that he lives in, the town specifically, they're scared of magic. They see it as this evil thing that corrupts people and ultimately kills them. So if they find out that he is magical, they will kill him. So he has to go on an adventure where he has to leave this town, effectively to find out who he is and what he is. And he has this small cast of characters, which are always very typical within James Tynion books. It's just a lot of fun. The characters are really nice. You don't like some of them at first, and you start to come around to them. You understand their motivations a bit better and why they're doing the things they're doing. So as much as it's a self-discovery story for Wynd, it's also that for the other characters that he's with. The art as well by Michael Dialinas, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. It's just spectacular. It's really, really good. They did a book together called The Woods, which was also pretty good, but I thought the art in that was fine. It was very serviceable, but I think it's a step up with this. I'll also mention that this is published by Boom Box rather than Boom specifically, which is just sort of the more child-friendly line that is still perfectly readable from adults as well. Coming in next, we've got Blackwater Lilies. This is from Magnetic Press, and it's an adaptation of a novel of the same name. The adaptation was done by Fred Duval and artist Didier Cassegrain. And the interesting thing about this, which I found out, is that because I believe it was a French adaptation, they do the artist first whenever they do French comics, which I thought was a nice little touch. So as you can probably tell from the front cover, this is following a murder. Specifically, in our story, we follow 3 women that live in this town of Giverny, which is the Normandy town where Monet did most of his paintings and got a lot of his inspiration. So art, and Monet specifically, is a huge running theme of this, all centered around the death of this man and the 3 women and how they relate to him and the things going on around the town. I enjoyed reading this book. I would say the first 90%, I was just enjoying it. It wasn't a chore to get through it, but I wasn't particularly gripped. The artwork is spectacular in here, but the story was just kind of okay. And they sort of establish who they think it might be, and then you get more and more evidence to suggest that's probably going to be the case. And so it wasn't super engaging even as a mystery. But right at the very end, there is a very intriguing, I don't want to say twist necessarily, because that kind of implies more, but there's a very interesting realization, and that opened this whole book up to me as being an actually amazing book that I immediately wanted to read again. So if you do read this, I would suggest just kind of working through it, enjoying the artwork, enjoying the characters, the dialogue, the overall story, and then just be prepared to flip back through the whole thing, because it kind of blew my mind how it went from something that I would have just said, it was fine, to this has been one of the more intriguing reads that I've had in a really long time. So next up might be my favourite read of the month. I think it's quite fitting for an October read as well, and it is Volume 1, the library edition of The Lonesome Hunters by Tyler Crook. He has written this, done all the artwork, done the lettering himself. I think he did everything in this apart from the editing. And this is published by Dark Horse. So The Lonesome Hunters follows these two main characters, Howard and Lupe. Howard is a much older than he appears man. He's over 100 years old. When he was younger, he was part of a group that would try and stop the forces of evil and supernatural things. Unfortunately, when kind of push came to shove for him to step up and do that, he was a coward and he failed, and it resulted in the death of everybody he knows. However, he was gifted this sword, this giant black sword, that has given him seemingly endless life. So we jump forward 100 years, and he's kind of just been laying low, not really doing anything, until one day, Lupe needs his help. Somebody in her family is being, I'm not going to say attacked, possessed maybe is the better word, by some magpies. And she bumps into him, gets his help, he gets the sword, and that starts their whole journey together of them trying to stop these magpies, which is a big thing in this, and then going on more adventures after that. It's really good, it's very intriguing, the characters are really good, like just an older man that's clearly out of practice and was at one point not even really kind of keeping up with what he should have been doing anyway. And then this young character that has so much more confidence and attitude towards these things. They're a great dynamic, and it's just an overall extremely well-written story. And the artwork in this as well is just amazing. Tyler Crook is so good, and the oversized library edition version of this is such a great way of taking in all of his artwork. Just a really enjoyable book to see and to take in. It's mind-blowing, kind of. I really hope he continues this story, because it ends well. Like, it doesn't end in a way that is totally just in the middle of something, but there's clearly a lot more that can be told here and a lot more that can be done. The journey is kind of only really starting, so I'm very hopeful we get more of this and more of these large editions of them as well. So I've mentioned before that I've been dipping my toe into the world of manga, as you've seen with At the Mountains of Madness already. Another one that I decided to finally pick up, because again they have these nice collected editions, has been Berserk from Dark Horse, and it's been created by Kentaro Miura, who unfortunately has passed away. So the story of Berserk, at least in Volume 1, is about a man called Guts who has been branded by something demonic, and it causes evil forces to be drawn to him that he has to kill. His ultimate goal seems to be to kill something called the God Hand, which seems to be these 5 demonic beings, as well as their apostles, people that have been granted kind of demon status, or at least demon powers. So he is on a journey to wipe them out. We don't necessarily understand what his motivations are in book 1. We don't know why he's doing it. We don't know how he got this brand. We don't know how he can swing this giant sword or how he learns to fight. He seems to be mortal. He gets referenced as a mortal a lot, but he can take a beating really, really well. So I don't know if there's more going on there. The action is pretty good. There's a lot of very edgy things to this book. I enjoyed this book overall, and I'm excited to keep reading them. I know there's a big fan base for this, so I'm going to be careful how I word anything going forward with this. But I did enjoy it. I think because it's Volume 1, and we're still figuring out who he is as a character, it's hard to look past how seemingly unnecessarily edgy he is. It seems like he's just written for teenage boys, which is not an issue, and I know that it gets better, and we've already seen the last chapter of this starts off the next big story arc, the Golden Age story arc, where we're kind of learning who he was as a kid and what's happened to him, and already that's been pretty horrible to see for him. So I get the justification of it, and like I said, I know that that stuff gets better. The artwork, I think overall, was pretty strong. There's some bits that aren't as good, but again, it's that early work, and it has already improved throughout this book. And there's moments early on in this book, like the double page spread of those skeletons coming alive, look really, really good. Chris from Off My Shelves made a prediction that by the end of Volume 1, I'll be kind of on the fence, and then by Volume 2, I'll be hooked. I think he's probably already correct. I think knowing the sort of praise that this gets, and my brother, who's read most of this story, he highly recommends it, and talking with him, he understood where I was coming from with some of these concerns and did alleviate the fact that they get better. So I'm sure book 2 will be when this really, really captivates me. And like I said, I did enjoy this. It was fun. The action's good. Overall, the characters are interesting, and I'm very intrigued. Like, I want to know more about what's going to happen in this story. So I will definitely pick up volume 2 of this and then just kind of go from there. Okay, so far everything's been pretty good. Either okay or kind of great. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about Berserker from Keanu Reeves and Matt Kint with Rob Garney and Bill Crabtree. So this is published by Boom Studios, and it's about a man who is effectively an endless being. He was born 80,000 years ago to a small tribe because they effectively wished for a warrior to help defend their tribe from the surrounding barbarians and people that were coming in trying to take things from them. And they were granted a son, and that son grew up very, very quickly, and when he gets too much anger or frustration or something, he goes berserk, and literally eyes glowing blue, goes crazy, obliterates everything around him. And so he defends that whole little village and is effectively used as a weapon of war. That's a small part of this story as far as what we see, but we do jump to modern day where he is working for the United States military, some sort of spec ops team, and he goes on missions for them. In exchange, they are trying to help cure his immortality so that he can eventually die. Because right now, it doesn't matter what happens to him, he rejuvenates, he comes back. This story goes kind of cosmic places, and there's almost elements, I don't want to say time travel, but there's definitely a lot of just out of time and space moments. It gets very just very convoluted, I feel like, a little bit. Like, it became a little confusing. I liked the idea of this story, this immortal warrior that's a berserker and can't die and is used as a weapon. I thought that was pretty good. And early on, I enjoyed it. It's intriguing, kind of knowing who he is, why he's immortal, what his heritage is. Is he connected to some sort of other being, a god, an alien, or something? We don't really know. But I just thought it was just a bit too, convoluted is kind of the word I would use. It just went to places that I felt like just caused confusion. The artwork was really good. The action scenes, super impressive. It just felt like there weren't enough of them, weirdly, and the end just kind of all tied together too strangely. There was almost like some odd Deus Ex Machina things that start happening. So yeah, I don't know. I wasn't a great lover of this. I wouldn't recommend checking it out, to be honest, unless you really, really like Keanu Reeves. I know they're doing adaptations of this. I know it's been very successful. I think it's a competent book. You got Matt Kint kind of heading the comic creation side of it, and then Keanu Reeves contributing to the story. So it's a well-made book. It's just a bit much. I feel like there's too many high-level concepts going on, and they weren't all executed perfectly. Been kind of a manga-heavy month, to be honest, which is not typical for me, because I also read Vinland Saga Deluxe Volume 4 by Makoto Yukimura, and this is the Kodansha Deluxe Edition. It's very similar size to the Dark Horse ones. I love Vinland Saga. I think it's such a well-made book. It's just interesting. Everything about it is just captivating. The characters, even the ones that you're supposed to hate, you love. This being book 4 means obviously we're quite a bit into it. We're still following Thorfinn, the main character. If you know nothing of Vinland Saga, obviously go back to the start with these books or watch the show. That's pretty good too. But it basically follows a young boy called Thorfinn who is trying to get revenge for the death of his father. Book 3 and 4 are further in time, and he's now in a different place doing different things, effectively farming, which sounds like such a weird shift to go from a revenge story to a kind of farming thing, but it works really well, and it's huge character development for Thorfinn and his surrounding cast. And you keep up with all the characters from books 1 and 2 as well. It's really good. This, I think, is kind of the end of what you would consider the farming chapter or era. So I'm really excited to see what happens in book 5, because I don't have a clue where it could go from here. Something I think this book does really, really well is showcase, artwork-wise, the abilities of the soldiers. I think the action scenes are super dynamic. You really get a sense of the skill level of these different people. When someone's fighting with swords, or somebody's not got a sword and they're fighting someone with a sword, seeing how they move, and you get to hear read the internal dialogue of the characters as they're doing this, and they are specifically calling out the strengths and the weaknesses of the person that they're fighting against internally. It's just a really cool way of doing fight scenes, I think, and I've not really seen something like this. Maybe it's more common in manga, but that internal monologuing, I really like that as a sort of storytelling device. I think if you're only going to check out one book from everything I've talked about today, I would go to Vinland Saga, go pick up Deluxe Volume 1. It's one of my favourite things I've read in a few years. So next up we have Canto. I read all 4 volumes of this. This is from David Boer and Drew Zucker, and it's published by IDW originally, and now it's being published by Dark Horse. I did cover this already in my Hidden Gems video, so I'm not going to again go too deep into that, but essentially it's set in a fantasy world. We follow a character called Canto, who's a small tin man, and he's on an adventure to defeat the Shrouded Man. He's this mysterious figure that lives in this world that is very evil, who has been enslaving people and basically just ruling over everybody. Canto's original sort of quest is to get a heart back for a young tin girl that he loves, and it eventually builds into something much larger where he's trying to actually take down the Shrouded Man entirely and free the whole world. In the Hidden Gems video, I talked about how much I liked this book, and doing a reread, that was still just as true. It's super fun, it's very whimsical, fantastical. The characters are all really just pleasant to read and intriguing, and they're all unique. It doesn't feel so much like a high fantasy thing where everybody's either an elf or an orc. They're all kind of their own things, which is really nice. It's more like the fantasy stories, similar to like Labyrinth and Neverending Story. You know, there's just a bit more uniqueness and almost a bit more strangeness to them in a really good way. Volume 5 is going to be out next year, which I believe wraps up the whole story. There might be other things they do in that world, other stories they tell, side things. But as far as the Shrouded Man v Canto sort of storyline, that should be it, I believe. Next up is going to be a book called In by Will McPhail. I don't actually own a copy of this book. Somebody at work lent me a copy, and I read it all in a single lunch break. In is about a cartoonist called Nick, and it's also about his relationship with relationships, finding meaningful connections with people, and how he struggles with that. He's good at the small talk, and he wants to feel these emotions. He goes to a bar, for example, at the start that he deems as a bar that a sad, lonely man would drink at, despite not being a sad, lonely man. He goes in and he asks the barkeep, what would a sad, lonely man order? And so he gives him a beer. So he's trying to put himself into these experiences, but otherwise not really connecting with anybody around him. Eventually, while a man is around fixing his toilet, he starts to have this internal monologue of, who is this for? Why are we doing this small talk, this back and forth? And he just opens up and is honest with him and tells this man he feels embarrassed about who he is around men like him. And that man responds, I feel that way sometimes too. And then the whole world opens up to Nick. He is transported to a world of colour, because the entire book is in black and white, apart from these moments where he deeply connects with somebody over something even just like that. And there's these beautifully illustrated pictures. He is implanted into them. It's almost like these beautiful paintings, lots of colour, and he starts to realise the joy of those connections, and he spends the rest of the book trying to have those connections with more and more people. There is a bigger overarching plot that happens here that I don't want to get too much into for spoiler reasons, but I really loved this book. This blew me away with how good it was. Also, it's very funny. The way the storytelling is done. I mentioned that he has this internal monologue with himself where he's thinking like, who are we doing this for? Who's this dance, this routine for? That is true throughout the entire book. Every interaction he has, you'll get what he says, and then the next panel will just be kind of blank faces while they're processing what he's just said, and he'll be thinking of something, and then he'll be thinking of something again, and then he says something else. So another example, he leaves his apartment, he overhears a neighbour having an argument with their wife, and he starts thinking, oh, maybe they want to talk about it, maybe I should ask. But then it's just him going, hi. And then the next thing is them going, oh, hi Nick, how are you? And he's like, I should ask. She clearly wants to talk about it. I'm good, busy day. And it's just that small talk, that nonsense small talk. And he's trying to persuade himself to ask these questions. It just keeps showing their faces. And it's kind of a really funny way of doing it. And I think the expressions on those faces are so telling. And I don't know, I just really liked the way he did that. This storytelling device of him thinking something, saying something else, and then the reaction of the person. I just thought it was brilliant. In was witty and charming and consistently funny and so heartfelt. It was extremely funny, but extremely sad, and just kind of uplifting, this idea of these connections and being truthful with each other and talking to each other more about more meaningful things. And it was nice and uplifting that a guy that had kind of just been, I don't want to call him a lazy bum because he works hard at his job, he's just not that good at connecting, like I said. And so it was uplifting to see a guy that wants that and craves it and seeks it out. Sometimes maybe a little selfishly, but I think he starts to realize that that's a positive thing for other people as well. Again, there's a bigger arching story sort of thing happening throughout this book that I'm not going to go into, because I do think you should read that book as blind as possible. So lastly, certainly not leastly though, is going to be Once and Future, books 1 and books 2. This collects the entire series. This is from Kieran Gillen, Dan Mora, and Tamara Bonvillain, which sounds like Bond villain, which is cool. And these are published by Boom Studios. I'm just going to put down one of them so I have a spare hand. So Once and Future is a story about stories. As a people, we have lots of myths and legends and stories of history. We have Beowulf and all the Shakespearean plays and the idea of King Arthur and the Round Table and Camelot. In this, the more people believe those things to be true, the more true they are. So this kind of all starts with somebody effectively resurrecting King Arthur. King Arthur wants to basically just bring about a true, pure-blooded Britain, and in doing so will kill everybody that he doesn't deem to be so. So we follow a grandmother, Bridget, and her grandson, Duncan, as they go on a quest to try and stop King Arthur from getting his knights and from going on his quest and from resurrecting himself fully and getting to full power and then taking over all of England. Along the way, though, other stories start getting involved. People that believe these things, again, become true. You also find that there's a really interesting thing that happens where people take on roles. So somebody is Sir Galahad, somebody is Lancelot, and the more they give into the story that they are that character, the more they lose themselves as a real person and become that character. The book goes kind of to some interesting places, these ideas of these other realms and, like I said, other stories getting involved. I think it's a really good book. I enjoyed reading both the editions of this. I think the only thing I didn't really like is that it can get a bit confusing in times. Like, it just feels like there's so many little rules they have to constantly abide by. Like, this person is going to be that character, but then they're also this character, and that other person is now interacting with that character in a way that isn't how the story was written. So what character does that make them? And there's a lot of that where you kind of, by the end of it, feel like everybody's multiple things, but then like it kind of doesn't feel like that matters that much, although in the moment it mattered more than anything. I think my explanation of that was as confusing as I found some of these parts of this book. Overall though, it's a really fun book. It's got some super interesting concepts. Again, this idea of these stories coming to life. It's super simple, but it is executed really well, and the artwork by Dan Mora is just astounding. Some of the pages in this, the character designs, the way Lancelot looks, for example, super cool, super sleek design. Overall, I really did enjoy this book. I think it's definitely worth checking out. Like I said, the artwork, just amazing. Dan Mora is one of the best in the business right now. It also ends in a way that is kind of interesting, because you could end it here entirely and be done, or if Kieran Gillen wanted to, he could return to this. He could do other stories. You know, this focuses a lot on Arthurian legend. There's whole other stories and myths. Whole other cultures have their own versions of, you know, these sorts of stories, or totally new, unique stories that we'd never have heard of. So that's really intriguing that he could go and do a whole series of this stuff if he wanted to. And I hope he does one day return to this. So there you go. That was everything I read in October. It was a bigger month of reading than I would have otherwise been planning. I was out sick from work for almost a week with some sort of stomach flu or norovirus or something. I don't know. But that allowed me to do a bit more reading than I otherwise would have done. So I wouldn't expect this amount in future months, but you never know. We'll see. So let me know what you've been reading recently. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you think of them, or if you're going to check any of them out because of the stuff that I rambled at you about for them. Again, if you like the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any more in the future. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.